The signal arrived like a clerical error. That is how history often begins, not with trumpets, but with a flicker on a diagnostic screen that should not exist. I was overseeing peripheral registrations for the grand spiral velocity trials when the anomaly surfaced, a new entrant beacon requesting authentication clearance. The encryption was crude, linear, inelegant. It lacked the layered quantum signatures customary among the elder civilizations of the Orion arm. At first, I assumed corruption in the intake lattice. Then I translated the identifier. Humanity. Earth. Sol system. The chamber dimmed as my ocular membranes constricted. Sol was catalogued as a developing yellow dwarf system, pre-unified, politically fragmented, technologically ambitious but inconsistent. They had achieved interplanetary travel only recently by our standards, still clinging to chemical propulsion relics not 3 centuries prior. And yet their application code was complete. They had filled every field, including the fatality waiver. 93% projected loss rate within the spiral circuit. The Black Star passage alone had erased empires older than their recorded history. The trials were not sport. They were culling by velocity, war without weapons, supremacy proven through navigation of engineered cosmic catastrophe. The High Council convened within 12 cycles of the alert. I remember the sound of their amusement, low-frequency harmonic pulses resonating through the chamber's crystalline floor. Several requested visual projection of Earth for entertainment. We watched their oceans churn beneath fragile atmospheric layers. We observed continental disputes. We reviewed data on their energy conflicts, their cultural fractures, their still-evolving planetary governance. They seek relevance, one counselor concluded. Or spectacle, said another. But I did not detect desperation in their transmission. I detected eagerness. It was embedded not in their formal language, which was respectful and economically phrased, but in the latency between signal bursts, the micro-accelerations in response timing, the subtle overclocking of their outbound relay array as if they leaned forward when sending it. They wanted this. That unsettled me more than arrogance would have. When we accessed the supplementary data packet attached to their request, confusion spread through the chamber. It contained no advanced slipstream schematics, no gravitational braid simulations, no neural interface telemetry. It contained archival recordings. Primitive vehicles, 4-wheeled ground machines, powered by controlled explosions, propelling themselves across narrow strips of hardened mineral surfaces. They drove them competitively, across deserts of shifting silica, across frozen plains where traction vanished beneath crystalline water, across closed circuits carved into landscapes solely to measure who could complete a loop first. We observed collisions at catastrophic velocities. Metal crumpling, structures shattering, machines rolling end over end in violent kinetic ballet. And then, the operators emerging alive, celebrated, applauded. Their commentary audio, translated, was saturated with exhilaration. They spoke of milliseconds as if they were sacred. They described sliding intentionally beyond traction thresholds. They trained reflexes not merely to avoid instability, but to command it. The vehicle lost directional alignment intentionally, tires screaming against asphalt, momentum redirected through controlled loss of control. The council dismissed it as primitive thrill-seeking, but my cognition spirals tightened. The spiral circuit itself was instability weaponized, collapsing gravity wells, ionized debris rivers, neutron star shear corridors. We elders sought to minimize chaos through predictive computation. Humans appeared to court it. They will not survive the opening phase, declared Counselor Virel. Grant them a slot, another suggested. Laughter rippled again. Yet protocol demanded fairness. The trials were open to any species capable of reaching the registration threshold and acknowledging the risks. Humanity had done both. Their final transmission before confirmation was brief. We understand the danger. No embellishment, no boasting, just acceptance. I authorized their entry. Even as I bid, a subtle compression tightened along my secondary neural ridge, a premonition response my species evolved to detect predatory intent in ancient oceans. But humans were not predators. They were new, unrefined, barely spacefaring by galactic standards. And still, their planetary data showed a history saturated with competition, warfare, survival against ecological collapse, innovation under constraint. They had not unified because it was easy. They had unified because extinction demanded it. When the confirmation beacon returned to Sol, their outbound signal amplitude spiked beyond necessity. Celebration rippled across their networks within hours. Global broadcasts,
visual feeds of their chosen pilots being interviewed beneath blue skies. 2 of them. Not an AI collective, not a neural symbiotic hive. 2 biological operators. Manual command authorization requested. Manual. The Council almost revoked approval at that clause, but regulations did not prohibit it. I archived the footage of their ancient combustion machines for further analysis. There was a pattern in the way they approached corners: late braking, violent rotation, acceleration before stability returned. They trusted reaction more than prediction. The grand spiral circuit was constructed by species who feared uncertainty. Humans appeared to treat uncertainty as terrain. As the official competitor list was broadcast across the Orion arm, their designation appeared at the bottom: Sol System, Humanity, single entry. Most viewers responded with amusement, some with indifference. I experienced something I had not felt in centuries of observation.
Anticipation. Because beneath their eagerness was something our simulations could not quantify. They were not entering to survive. They were entering to test themselves against catastrophe. And in that distinction lay the first fracture in our assumptions. We believed the trials to be a proving ground built by the powerful to display dominance. We did not yet understand. We had just invited a species forged by chaos into a competition designed to control it, and the race had not even begun. If the registration signal unsettled us, the arena was meant to humble them. The grand spiral circuit does not forgive arrogance, it devours it. Stretching across 3 star systems, the circuit was less a track and more a weaponized equation, a living labyrinth of collapsing neutron corridors, ionized debris rivers, and artificial gravity wells engineered centuries ago by the architects of Virex. Entire civilizations had contributed to its construction, each adding refinements to ensure that only the most advanced species could survive its opening phase. Even our champions required neurosymbiotic computation arrays, organic minds fused with predictive engines capable of calculating 12 million trajectory permutations per second. Humans arrived with one ship. It emerged from slipspace without flourish, its drive wake uneven, its thermal signature imperfectly masked. Compared to the shimmering vessels of the elder races, sleek hulls bending starlight around gravititic spines, the human craft looked industrial. Angular plating, external thrusters visibly mounted along the aft section, modular seams exposed rather than grown seamlessly from molecular lattices, no quantum sail arrays, no psionic interface dome. It looked assembled, not evolved. A murmur passed through the observation tiers. Mining, someone transmitted privately. But it was not a mining vessel. Our scans confirmed structural reinforcement at stress points consistent with high-velocity maneuvering, redundant fuel injectors, overbuilt shock absorption matrices. It was not elegant. It was stubborn. When we penetrated the cockpit scan, the unease deepened. 2 pilots, biological, seated side by side. Manual controls dominated the interface, physical levers, tactile feedback wheels, mechanical toggles layered atop digital overlays. Their neural implants were minimal, auxiliary at best. They had rejected full autopilot integration. Manual. The term echoed uncomfortably within my cognition spirals. The starting grid formed near the outer edge of a fragmented dwarf star, its gravitational instability feeding the first stage of the course, a cascading debris field drawn into chaotic orbit by artificial wells. The opening pulse would detonate from the central beacon, signaling acceleration. Around the grid, vessels shimmered like celestial predators poised to strike, organic hulls pulsing with bioluminescent energy, crystalline frames refracting radiation into propulsion vectors. The human ship idled. Its engines vibrated audibly across vacuum, through carrier resonance. Crude but powerful. The countdown began. 10. 9. Across the grid, predictive systems spun into overdrive. Telemetry feeds displayed pre-calculated arcs in luminous overlays, optimal paths threading impossibly narrow corridors between debris clusters. 3. 2. 1. The opening pulse detonated, a sphere of compressed radiation expanding outward like a newborn star. Every vessel launched simultaneously. Except the human ship. It did not move. Gasps, literal and transmitted, rippled through the observation chamber. A delay registered on my display. 43 seconds. In the trials, that was an eternity. A counselor demanded. No, I replied, though my internal processors strained. Then the human engines flared, but not along the optical arc. They accelerated directly toward the densest debris stream, an area every predictive model had flagged as fatal within the first 6 seconds. They miscalculated. Someone whispered. No. They committed. The vessel entered the debris river at violent velocity. Fragments of alloyed asteroid matter the size of transport frigates spun chaotically in intersecting gravitational currents. Even micro-impacts at such speeds would shear shielding layers. The human craft did not weave cleanly. It rotated. Intentionally. Plasma vented asymmetrically from its port thrusters, forcing the hull into a controlled yaw. A debris fragment clipped their starboard plating. Instead of recoiling, they used the impact. The collision altered their vector just enough to pivot around a secondary gravity eddy that had trapped 2 other competitors in recursive loops. My secondary heart accelerated. They are losing efficiency, another observer noted. Yes, they were. Their path was not optimal. It was adaptive. A larger fragment careened toward them. Calculations predicted unavoidable collision. At the last microsecond, the human ship cut primary thrust entirely. Momentum shifted. The fragment grazed their dorsal plating, transferring rotational energy. They rode it. Using the spin as kinetic leverage, they slingshotted around a collapsing neutron wake that consumed a crystalline vessel behind them in a silent flash of annihilation. Silence consumed the chamber. The human's internal audio feed, briefly broadcast through shared spectator channels, revealed something unexpected. Laughter. Not panic. Not rigid focus. Laughter, hedged with exhilaration. They were not merely surviving chaos. They were playing with it. By the midpoint of the debris phase, half the grid had stabilized into predictable arcs, maximizing speed through precision. The human craft lagged in raw velocity, but gained position through terrain exploitation, cutting through unstable pockets others avoided, sacrificing clean lines for strategic shortcuts. Where we sought to eliminate randomness, they navigated within it.
The first checkpoint beacon ignited ahead, a ring of coherent light marking transition into the gravitational slalom. Order began to reassert itself. The leading vessels aligned for maximum acceleration through the gate. My display recalculated standings. First, Virex Prime. Second, Talrex Consortium. Third, Aurelian Drift Collective. Fourth, I recalculated. Fourth, Sol System, Humanity. Impossible. Their hull bore visible scarring. One external thruster emitted irregular bursts. Efficiency losses exceeded 12%. And yet they were fourth, behind only empires with centuries of racing dominance. They were smiling. Smiling. Around me, the council no longer laughed. They recalculated. Updated threat projections. Revised survival probabilities. For the first time since the trial's inception, predictive models began diverging from expected confidence intervals. The humans crossed the first checkpoint ring trailing ionized debris like a comet's tail, engines screaming against vacuum in defiance of elegant theory. And as the gravitational slalom phase activated, an arena where precision mattered more than improvisation, I realized something deeply unsettling. If this was how they performed in chaos, what would they do once they understood the pattern? The next corridor opened, and the humans did not slow down. The second system of the grand spiral circuit was not designed for speed. It was designed for certainty. Where the opening debris river punished hesitation, the tactical corridor rewarded mathematical perfection. Gravity streams were stabilized into semi-predictable eddies. Ionized particle winds were tuned to favor ships capable of maintaining continuous thrust arcs. Most species entered this phase believing the race would finally normalize. They were wrong. The humans changed the meaning of movement itself. I first noticed it in the telemetry divergence patterns. Their ship was not pursuing the shortest path between beacons. Instead, it drifted deliberately through gravitational microeddies that should have been avoided by any rational navigator. Each drift amplified turbulence behind them, destabilizing pursuit vectors of trailing competitors. They were not racing only forward. They were weaponizing the environment. A veteran vessel from the Zyra Dominion attempted a classical overtaking maneuver along the outer acceleration band. The humans allowed them to approach. Then at the exact moment of predicted intersection, the human ship triggered a localized engine pulse reversal. The wake shockwave expanded outward like a collapsing halo. Zyra navigation algorithms failed to compensate. The vessel lost structural coherence across its port lattice and was forced into emergency retreat. No weapon was fired, yet the competitor was neutralized. What? Someone asked in the observation chamber. The trials had no rule forbidding environmental manipulation, only direct sabotage.
The humans were learning that distinction faster than anyone had expected. Their cockpit audio feed remained active across spectator channels. They spoke constantly, not in structured tactical command codes, but in emotional language. Laughter followed close calls. Their physiological monitors displayed elevated stress hormones during critical turns, yet motor precision improved under pressure spikes. This contradicted established galactic neurocombat theory. Most species required calm cognitive states for optimal navigation. Humans, however, appeared to function better when their survival probability oscillated near the boundary of catastrophe. They did not avoid fear, they transformed it into acceleration. Halfway through the tactical corridor, the undefeated champion of Tau Rex Prime entered interception posture. Tau Rex Prime was ancient, their empire predated the spiral circuit itself. Their pilots were genetically optimized for spatial dominance. For 7 consecutive trial cycles, they had never lost a dual maneuver. Their vessel approached from the upper curvature of the pulsar corridor, attempting a containment arc that would force the human craft into gravitational compression zones. The human pilots noticed immediately. "Looks like they're trying to box us in," one said. Engine output dropped by 20%. Observers interpreted the action as surrender positioning. The Tau Rex ship accelerated, tightening the interception net. The human vessel drifted closer to the corridor wall, where radiation density was highest. Warning systems screamed across human cockpit interfaces. Structural strain indicators flashed crimson. Another microsecond of exposure would exceed material tolerance thresholds. Tau Rex Prime transmitted a victory pulse. They believed the humans were trapped. Then the human pilot executed what our engineering archives later labeled the primitive combustion burst. Primary thrust injectors ignited simultaneously. The maneuver was violently unsophisticated by galactic standards. Instead of smooth vector transition, the human ship forced a sudden high-energy expansion of exhaust plasma, exploiting Newtonian reaction momentum rather than relativistic field shaping. At such velocity regimes, the maneuver should have produced catastrophic hull oscillation. Instead, the humans compensated manually. The pilot's hands moved across mechanical control interfaces in micro-adjustments too small for external monitoring but essential for stabilization. The ship rotated 90 degrees mid-burst, 18 seconds. In racing combat physics, that margin was death. The Tau Rex vessel entered the corridor wall's gravitational shear zone. Their structural lattice collapsed across 3 harmonic layers. Disqualification signal emitted silently across the broadcast network. The audience chamber did not celebrate. It did not protest. It processed what had occurred.
An undefeated civilization had been defeated without a single offensive weapon being fired. Humans had hunted them using motion alone. The commentary networks struggled to categorize the maneuver. Some labeled it tactical aggression. Others called it psychological warfare. I studied the cockpit biometric feeds again. Heart rate spikes, adrenaline surges, muscle tension patterns synchronized between the 2 pilots during critical moments. They were not merely operating the ship, they were operating each other. Communication between them was continuous, spoken, emotional, and instinctive. Unlike neural hive species, humans did not merge cognition, they synchronized chaos. As the corridor narrowed toward the second checkpoint gate, trailing ships began altering their own strategies. 2 smaller species abandoned optimal path calculations and began attempting human-style drift exploitation. The humans noticed. The other replied quietly, "Good." This statement was translated into 17 galactic languages during broadcast delay. The meaning unsettled many observers because it implied the humans wanted imitation. Imitation creates pattern. Pattern creates vulnerability. As the checkpoint beacon of the second system glowed ahead, marking transition into the Black Star Passage corridor, the human ship did not surge forward immediately. Instead, it slowed slightly, as if inviting pursuit. Behind them, veteran empires began accelerating, and I understood with growing dread that the humans were not running the race. They were shaping it. The Black Star Passage opened like the mouth of a cosmic abyss, and the humans entered first. The Black Star Passage was where civilizations learned humility. No engine design had ever truly conquered it.
The passage was not a corridor in the traditional sense. It was a fracture in physics itself, a region where gravitational fields did not follow stable harmonic structure. Instead, space folded in unpredictable layers, creating phantom acceleration zones, temporal lag pockets, and rotational vortices that could desynchronize even the most advanced navigation matrices. Entire dynasties had vanished inside it, not in spectacular explosions, but in silence. 3 ships entered the passage simultaneously. History dictated that only one would survive. The human vessel entered without hesitation. Inside the passage, our predictive surveillance arrays suffered degradation. Statistical projection engines began generating contradictory outputs. Even automated commentary systems struggled to maintain narrative coherence. The humans were doing something worse than breaking rules. They were adapting faster than we could model them. Inside the cockpit, their interface displays flickered with warnings across multiple languages. Hull stress thresholds approaching critical levels. Gravitational shear detected. Trajectory stability compromised. One pilot spoke. The other answered. Voice calm. Vent engine 3.
The command was executed manually. A plume of plasma vented into vacuum from the port engine cluster. This was counterintuitive engineering. Venting energy reduced overall propulsion efficiency, but it generated localized torque correction. The ship's rotation accelerated violently. Warning sirens screamed across human control interfaces. Yet the pilots did not attempt immediate stabilization. Instead, they leaned into the spin. This was the moment that fractured galactic expectations. The human ship rotated like a thrown stone skipping across cosmic water. Gravitational fractures inside the passage functioned like invisible surfaces. Each distortion pocket allowed partial momentum transfer. The humans were not fighting chaos, they were riding it. Behind them, 2 veteran vessels from the Aurelian Drift Collective attempted to replicate the maneuver. They delayed vent timing by milliseconds, attempting precision synchronization. Their calculations were too rigid. The passage punished certainty. One vessel's stabilizer lattice shattered under asymmetric shear stress. Emergency evacuation signals triggered across 17 biological subsystems. The ship disappeared into a harmonic gravity pocket without explosion. 07 radians, structural oscillation cascaded through their propulsion spine. They were forced into retreat. The human ship did not slow. Inside the cockpit, stress indicators remained elevated but stable. Their laughter had stopped. Focus replaced it. The pilot's hands moved across mechanical control surfaces in micro-adjustments invisible to external observers. The human navigation philosophy was becoming clear. They were not calculating perfect paths. They were correcting failure continuously. Predictive superiority was irrelevant. Real-time resilience was everything. Midway through the passage, a gravitational shear wave struck the vessel's dorsal plating. Structural microfractures propagated along reinforcement seams. One human pilot's voice lowered, 3 seconds. Then the other said, "Not yet." This statement would later be analyzed in military academies across 12 galactic sectors, because it represented a philosophy unknown to us. They did not immediately direct damage, they allowed instability to serve as propulsion. The vessel tilted dangerously along a phantom gravity gradient. Instead of fighting the tilt, they used it to curve around a collapsing harmonic node that had consumed an ancient racing cruiser 3 centuries prior. The human craft emerged from the passage like a wounded predator climbing from deep water. Hull plating scorched, external thruster number 2 malfunctioning, primary telemetry line degraded. And yet, they exited in second place. The broadcast chamber fell into absolute silence, not because of victory, but because of what followed. Across the Orion Arm, observation feeds displayed something unprecedented. Other species were copying human maneuvers. First came the younger races.
Then the veteran empires. Talrex training academies transmitted drift compensation algorithms based on human combustion burst physics. Zyra Dominion pilots began practicing intentional rotational instability under controlled environments. Even Virex commentary networks displayed simulated human cockpit communication patterns. Fear had transformed, not into hatred, not into surrender, into respect. Political pressure inside high council chambers increased exponentially. Some demanded disqualification. They argued that humans were exploiting environmental mechanics in ways the trials were not designed to regulate. Others countered that the humans were demonstrating the true purpose of the competition: survival under chaos. The statistical projection engines reached a paradox state. Human performance did not follow traditional learning curves. Instead of plateauing after optimization, their efficiency oscillated around stress thresholds. The models failed to converge.
For the first time since the trials were created, the Council could not predict the winner with confidence. I reviewed the human cockpit audio. One pilot spoke quietly. The other responded. Pause. There was no triumphalism, only determination. Ahead of them, the final corridor sequence activated, the Starforge Arena, a region where plasma storms erupted unpredictably around an artificial sun core, where victory was decided not by speed alone, but by survival itself. The human ship aligned its nose toward the burning heart of the course, and behind them, the galaxy began to learn how to move the way humans moved. But learning does not guarantee survival. The final lap was waiting. The final system of the grand spiral circuit was called the compression funnel. Architects of the trials designed it to remove uncertainty. Only 2 ships could safely occupy the apex corridor simultaneously. The geometry was intentionally unforgiving, converging gravitational currents, plasma wind channels, and artificial debris shears that punished any deviation from optimal vector alignment. The reigning champions of this age were the Virex. They were not simply competitors, they were biological engineering perfection. Virex pilots were grown, not trained, symbiotic neural clusters calibrated for spatial prediction. Their cognition operated in multi-layer probability streams, allowing them to foresee micro-instability zones before they formed. As the human vessel approached the funnel entrance, the Virex champion transmitted a compressed harmonic pulse across open channels. Yield. The translation matrix rendered it as a command. The human response was almost casual. The audio burst carried laughter modulation. Then the human engines surged. Hull integrity alarms ignited across their cockpit displays. Thermal expansion indicators rose beyond recommended safety envelopes. Microfractures began propagating along the vessel's outer plating, where stress concentration exceeded design tolerance.
Most species would have reduced thrust output. The humans increased it. Frame stress at 82%, one pilot reported. Hold it, the other answered. Inside the funnel corridor, dual ship velocity created cascading spatial distortion. The Virex vessel moved with surgical precision, aligning itself along the mathematically optimal acceleration arc. Their shielding lattice shimmered like living crystal under gravitational compression. They attempted positional dominance. The humans did something terrifyingly simple. They drifted slightly toward the Virex shield boundary. Not collision, contact. Just enough to touch the perimeter field. The human craft used the Virex defensive shield as a compression ramp. At relativistic velocity regimes, shield plasma fields behave like semi-solid pressure surfaces under certain harmonics. The humans exploited this phenomenon by transferring momentum vectorially across the shield boundary. It was not a maneuver predicted by combat physics models. It was not elegant. It was dangerous. Hull warning systems screamed as external plating temperature exceeded structural safety margins. One pilot spoke. "Make it 3, said the other. They rotated the ship 22 degrees along its longitudinal axis. The compression ramp effect amplified forward thrust efficiency by channeling residual gravitational shear energy into propulsion continuity. The Virex champion attempted counter-positioning, but the human craft was already sliding along the shield curvature like a stone skipping across molten crass. Behind them, microfractures expanded across the corridor wall. Debris clusters collapsed inward under dual vessel stress. The funnel itself was beginning to destabilize. The human cockpit filled with warning lights. One pilot's breathing became audible across shared broadcast channels. Not panicked, focused, measured. They sacrificed efficiency for immediate stability. The vented plasma stream generated a secondary torque vector that corrected minor yaw oscillation caused by shield contact turbulence. The maneuver was primitive. It was also genius, because perfection fails when reality becomes nonlinear. The Virex pilot attempted a final predictive arc interception, calculating exit geometry to overtake at the apex release zone. Their neural cluster produced 12 million trajectory forecasts. All indicated victory, except one. The human craft released compression contact at the exact moment the corridor wall entered phase resonance with the funnel core. The ship executed a sudden combustion burst acceleration, again using Newtonian reaction thrust rather than field-symmetric propulsion. The method was considered archaic, but it worked under chaotic shear stress. The human vessel surged forward. The exit beacon expanded into visible space. Behind them, the Virex champion followed in perfect structural form. They survived, but they were behind.
The human ship crossed the compression funnel exit threshold first. Silence fell across the Galactic broadcast network. Then something unexpected happened. No species protested. No empire issued condemnation. Instead, awe spread slowly through the spectator clusters. because the humans had revealed a paradox of engineering philosophy. We had built the trials to reward perfection, predictive dominance, controlled execution. But humans had demonstrated something deeper. They did not seek to eliminate chaos. They learned to cooperate with it. Across the Orion Arm, training academies began rewriting tactical doctrine. Simulations were updated to include instability exploitation variables. Young pilots from multiple species began practicing what was now called human-style maneuver theory. The Virax champion transmitted a single signal after crossing the finish line. Respect. No challenge. No complaint. Just recognition. Inside the human cockpit, the pilots sat quietly as emergency cooling systems stabilized the hull. One spoke. The other replied. Voice tired but satisfied. Yeah. The galaxy heard that statement. And for the first time in recorded history, victory felt less like domination and more like invitation. Behind the human vessel, the Starforge arena flared brilliantly as the final competitors crossed or failed. The trials had ended, but something far more dangerous had begun. Because now every species knew. Perfection could be calculated. Chaos could be feared. But humans waste inside chaos and made it obey. The Starforge arena rested at the heart of the spiral circuit like a burning god. It was not built for beauty. It was built for judgment. Artificial plasma storms circled the stellar core in irregular cycles, erupting without warning as containment matrices struggled to stabilize fusion turbulence. Timing became everything. A single miscalculated microsecond meant vaporization. The human ship entered the final lap trailing ionized light from the compression funnel escape. Their hull integrity indicators had fallen below 40%. External plating showed structural fatigue along reinforcement seams. Secondary thruster number 2 was operating at partial output. Fuel reserves were approaching conservation threshold. From a purely rational perspective, they were losing. And yet, biometric monitoring feeds from the human cockpit displayed something deeply unsettling to alien observers. Elevated dopamine activity, reduced heart rate volatility, motor coordination precision increasing under sustained stress. The humans were enjoying the race. Behind them, the Virax champion pursued with surgical elegance. No wasteful motion, no instability. Every arc was mathematically optimized for interception efficiency. 7.
The Virax vessel interpreted the deceleration as opportunity. Their predictive neural cluster calculated optimal overtaking geometry along the inner flare boundary where acceleration potential peaked. They committed. The final plasma flare cycle approached. Starforge containment rings resonated as fusion pressure reached release threshold. Across the arena, spectators knew what was coming. 2 seconds. 9. 5. The human cockpit remained calm. One pilot spoke softly. The engines did not surge immediately. Instead, they held. Then, at the exact predicted moment of Virax overtaking alignment, the Starforge released its plasma eruption. The flare burst outward like the birth of a violent sun. Thermal radiation pressure waves expanded across the corridor. The Virax vessel deployed defensive harmonic shielding, absorbing the burst to maintain structural coherence. This was expected. What was not expected was the human reaction. The humans did not shield against the shockwave. They rode it. Using external hull curvature and residual compression momentum from the funnel exit phase, the human ship aligned itself along the wave propagation vector. At relativistic velocities, shockwaves behave like transient propulsion surfaces when structural resonance is maintained. The human craft surged forward atop burning stellar wind. Hull temperature alarms screamed across cockpit displays. External plating breached in microfracture cascades. Atmospheric containment layers activated sequentially. Inside, the pilots remained focused. Behind them, the Virax champion attempted emergency vector correction, but defensive absorption of the plasma shockwave reduced their forward momentum efficiency. They were forced to stabilize first. That fraction of hesitation was enough. The human ship crossed the luminous finish boundary, trailing a comet-like tail of burning ion plasma. First, the human craft was first, but physics does not reward victory gently. 1 second after crossing the threshold, structural fatigue exceeded tolerance limits across 3 primary hull sectors. The outer plating shattered along pre-existing fracture lines. Emergency containment fields detonated in blue-white stabilization bursts.
The vessel's dorsal segment ruptured partially under thermal stress. Hull breach alarms activated simultaneously in multiple languages. Medical scanners inside the cockpit confirmed the pilots were alive. Barely. The human ship drifted forward slowly after crossing the line, leaving streams of incandescent plasma behind like wounded starlight. The Virex champion crossed moments later. They survived, but their trajectory was behind the humans. 8 seconds. Then it happened. The council observation chamber received the first applause signal. It was not political. It was not forced. It was organic. Species by species, civilization by civilization, the galaxy responded. Some transmitted formal respect pulses. Others released ceremonial harmonic tones.
The younger races celebrated openly. Even the ancient empires, those who had dominated the spiral circuit for centuries, displayed what our cultural analysts identified as admiration behavior. Because the humans had done something the galaxy had not predicted. They did not defeat perfection. They surpassed it using controlled imperfection. Inside the human cockpit, one pilot spoke. "Yeah?" The other answered, "Yeah." The statement was transmitted across delayed broadcast channels. Many species struggled to translate it, but the meaning was clear. They were not declaring final victory. They were declaring future competition. The High Council chambers fell silent, not in defeat, but in contemplation. We had built the spiral trials to prove superiority through precision. The humans had shown that survival itself could be turned into strategy. As the Starforge arena dimmed behind the drifting human vessel, I recorded my final observation. Perfection can be simulated, chaos can be feared, but humans do not wait for stability. They enter instability willingly. They race inside storms, and sometimes they teach the storm how to move. The next trial cycle would be different, because every species watching now knew one terrifying truth. Humanity was not the fastest, not the most advanced, but they were the only species that seemed capable of making catastrophe their ally. And as the human ship drifted away from the burning Starforge, still trailing fire, the galaxy began preparing for the day humans would return, not as challengers, but as storm riders. The medical frigates arrived first, their silver-white hulls cut quietly through the dark orbit of the Starforge remnants, positioning themselves around the damaged human vessel like cautious guardians studying a wounded predator. Inside the cockpit, the 2 human pilots were still breathing. Barely. Life support indicators pulsed in slow, stubborn rhythm. Hull rupture seals had stabilized 3 primary fracture zones, but thermal stress damage remained visible along the dorsal plating. Emergency medical drones extended from the frigates of the Grand Spiral Velocity Trials Recovery Fleet, projecting healing radiation fields across the human craft's interior. When we interviewed them through secure channel transmission, the humans did not speak of victory. They did not issue threats. They did not demand recognition. We had fun. The statement circulated across diplomatic networks within minutes. Many species struggled to interpret it. Fun was a dangerous concept when survival probability had been so close to extinction thresholds. Our archivists replayed every frame of the race. Humanity did not demonstrate superior structural technology. Their vessel was not the fastest. It was not the most efficient. It was not the most elegant. Instead, humans displayed adaptive instability mastery. They operated near failure boundaries deliberately.
Their pilots showed synchronized emotional motor performance under extreme stress fluctuations. Neural analysis revealed that their reaction precision improved when survival uncertainty increased. The phenomenon contradicted every doctrine taught within the academies of the High Council strategic institutes. Galactic warfare models assume optimal combat required reduction of chaos. Humans proved the opposite. They converted chaos into operational leverage. Medical scanners confirmed both pilots would survive, recovery time estimated at 3 standard cycles. When asked about their technique during post-race diplomatic observation, the human team declined technical explanation. Instead, they spoke about practice, training in environments that simulated failure, learning to react rather than predict. One human pilot said something that would later be translated across 17 major languages of the Galactic Network. The High Council convened emergency doctrine review sessions within a single cycle after the race ended. Military academies across multiple empires began studying something newly labeled as human tactical driving theory. Simulation programs were updated to include instability exploitation modules. Trade alliances between stellar civilizations and the system of Sol expanded dramatically.
Economic exchanges increased by nearly 400% as younger species sought technological collaboration with humanity. But the most disturbing development was not diplomatic, it was psychological. During the championship crest ceremony, the human team accepted the spiral victory mark. The crest was a living crystalline symbol that recorded their achievement within galactic memory archives. After accepting it, one of the humans spoke again, quietly, almost casually. The statement spread across communication channels like a whisper traveling through vacuum. Many species attempted to decode hidden meaning. Was it a threat? A declaration of future dominance? A warning? Human cultural analysts later explained it differently. The humans were not declaring permanent victory. They were declaring permanent participation. They viewed competition not as war, but as continuation. As long as races existed, they would return. The High Council observation record contains my final entry regarding this species. Humans do not wait for perfect conditions. They do not require technological superiority. They do not fear unstable terrain. Instead, they enter instability willingly. They ride probability edges like navigators crossing cosmic storms. They do not attempt to eliminate chaos. They learn its rhythm. Some younger civilizations have begun referring to humanity as the species that races storms. Because humans do not simply survive catastrophe, they move inside it. They treat uncertainty as track surface. They accelerate where others break.
And as I watched the human medical frigates escort their damaged vessel away from the Starforge arena, still glowing faintly with residual plasma fire, I realized something ancient and terrifying. The galaxy had spent millennia building perfection. Humanity had spent its history learning how to function when perfection breaks. The next grand spiral velocity trials will be different, because every empire now knows one truth that cannot be erased from strategic doctrine. When the storm comes, most species will search for shelter. Humanity will search for acceleration. And sometimes, they will teach the storm how to race beside them.